About places when I tonight is going to be animal stories, animal encounters, but the encounters are all about where they happen because I don't think I don't think animals, I don't think plants, I don't think any of the world exists in isolation. It exists in a place. Exists in a landscape, in an environment, and I want to take you to a number of environments tonight. Let me just start by reading a short piece, just a couple paragraphs I wrote from the mangy forests of the Pacific Northwest. Far from any trail, I waited by a shallow wandering river. Hemlock and red cedars parted to allow a cloudy gray window above. We picked this tumbled crowd of life and death to rest where moss poured from ragged stumps and roots upended. There are places where the earth conspires, elements joining, as if you've stepped into the animal landscape. I can't say why we stayed quiet, but after a minute or two, neither of us wanted to break the spell. We'd been backpacking through the deep woods of the Olympics, crawling over these enormous, monstrous trees fallen from the wind until it felt like we were as deep as a person could go. And we didn't want to break the spell. There is something about being silent, being hidden in the woods. There are many reasons to come to a standstill in the woods, the way shadows spill into themselves, trees toppled, rotting, covered in life. The river echoed into a gorge made of living things, tall Pacific conifers, primordial in darkness and heft. A herd of elk emerged from shadows, antlers turning and lowering, ears of cow elk flicking off mosquitoes. They stepped into water as clear as ice, looking upstream and down to see who might be here, not finding us among so many stumps and flood-rooted, wind-down trees. I don't remember breathing, as if I were holding in my scent. I didn't want them to know I was here. I wanted to just see them. These were the largest of the American elk, a subspecies nearly moose in size, heads and necks as dark as polished teak, fur of their bodies pale as moonlight. They would have glowed had it been any darker, their procession lighting up the tree vault. The elk passed into shadows on the other side, with only a pause from the great antlered bull, who may have looked at us or may have not, peering along the river one last time before they all were gone. These encounters that we have with animals, often it's just like that. It is just a passing, a glance. And you realize that it's not so much about just that one moment. It is everything around you. It is the smell of the place. It is the flow of the water and how it sounds echoing in the trees. Animals are about their landscapes. I think it's true for us too. We are about our places. We are animals as well. It is all about where you are, what is around you, what you smell, what you drink, the shade you take. Not too long ago, just a few weeks ago, we found fireflies out here where we live. Now, if you live somewhere more humid in the world, maybe Cleveland. I think you probably have fireflies out there. Maybe you're used to them. I don't know how you could ever get used to fireflies. But out here, you just do not see them. I think 3 times in my life have I seen fireflies in the dry West. And just a few weeks ago, or maybe a month or so ago, we found a place down on a river not too far from here, where at dusk we started seeing the little flashes of electric green light. And and that's just absurd in this landscape. It's not something you grow up with. It's not something you ever see. And as the night went on, they grew, the lights flashing more and more. There weren't many of them. At first, we can only count um, 2 or 3 at a time for about an hour. And that was enough. Just to see that is magical, to see the males up high, flickering and flashing, and the females down in the grass. And then there were more. Then there were 5, 10, 15. Maybe there were no more than 20 in the end, but along the river, they had gathered in these low whipsnap willows under the cottonwood trees, and they were flashing to each other, communicating, talking, telling their story. When you watch something like this, you'll see one just take off, flying away, and you'll see the glance of its light, and then it's gone. But you saw its life for that moment. You see everything gathered here. Maybe there was something about the humidity of this certain spot. The river hits bedrock in this place, and so the water kind of spreads out, and the ground is a little damp. So maybe it was adjusted humidity. I don't know what it was, but this place was magical. And I found a comment by 2 Chilean biologists, Umberto Materna and Francisco Varela, who are studying life systems. And they wrote, living systems are cognitive systems, and living as a process is a process of cognition. This statement is lawful for all organisms, with or without a nervous system. That line really struck me, because we often think of animal encounters as the bear or the bighorn sheep, when sometimes it is fireflies. And we as humans align with things that are like us, and we think, oh, that's got a face, or that's got hands, or that has claws, so it's closer to us. But all of these things are part of this living web, flowing in and out of each other. My sweetheart and I went back a couple of weeks later to see if it was still going on, to see if the fireflies were still flashing. And we went out at dusk, and we were standing there by the river, and they came out again. And there weren't so many. So I think there's just a period of maybe 2 or 3 weeks where this happens. And I'll be checking back in the coming years. But you could see the females glowing from down on the ground, and she picked one up in her hands, and it walked across her fingers, and she held it inside of her hand, the light coming out as if from a lantern. And then she opened her hand, and it walked onto mine, glowing that electric green. But it wasn't the only animal there that night. As this was just starting up, as dusk was just leaving with that last pointillist light, we were facing each other, and I said, there's a fox right behind you, right behind you. And she turned slowly and looked, and there was a fox that had come up behind her and was studying us. And it kind of circled us and sat down and watched us for a while, because it was on a route and we were in the middle of it, and it was curious about us. It wanted to converse, or it wanted to find out what we were. It stayed with us for maybe 5 minutes before trotting away. And then we were facing each other again, and she said, right behind you, there's a skunk. And I turned and looked, and there was a striped skunk trotting down the trail right behind me. And hold on a second. Hey, boys. Shh. Teenagers, another kind of animal. Hey, Jado, Jasper, a little quieter. They live in the house. They make nests back there. You see them on occasion. So the skunk walked up behind me, and it was heading straight for me as if it didn't know I was there. And I moved slightly, which startled it. And it turned around and ran off. But it kept trying to poke its way through, walking along the river, checking to see where we were. And then later that night, after the fireflies had died off a little bit, the fox came back and circled us and sat and watched. And you have these moments with animals, and you're looking around saying, this has something to do with the fireflies. It has something to do with the skunk. This is a place. This is like that spot along the river in the Olympics where something happens. You have a moment where you encounter other beings, other creatures who are thinking, maybe not like you're thinking, a different kind of thought, a different spectrum, but still sentient, I would say, from the skunk to the fox to the firefly. I want to take you to a place now that is I'm interested in where animals congregate, where they come together and what they're doing, where especially where it's a single species, what's happening in this one place. So I'm going to share this video with you right now. Let's see if this works.
This is a secret place. I can't tell you where this is. I can tell you that it is in the desert and it's rare. There's a small canyon system here that has aspen trees growing inside of it. And this is a relict population of aspens. They were probably here in the Ice Age. And then as the cold retreated, the land up on top dried out, the aspens came down into these little canyons and they stayed here. And this is their place. This is a series of canyons where each one is deep and it's got a little bit of moisture inside of it and coolness. So the aspens gather here. This is the smaller grove. There's a bigger one over the top of this on the other side. And these aspen groves are marking places. All the aspen trees in these groves are scratched up. You can see these long claw marks coming down. These marks are mountain lions. I've never seen a gathering like this. You see aspen trees that are marked up by them, but not that are marked all around, and every single tree is scratched up. And it's as if the mountain lions know that when you scratch an aspen tree, give it enough years, and that will darken and will become a sign. And you can imagine the mountain lions jumping up onto this thing and their weight pulling them down, that their arms are wrapped around it and their claws are dug into it as if tearing apart the spine of a deer. This is where they gather. I wonder about places where animals come together. What are they doing, even if it's over generations? I mean, the markings here are going on 30, 40, 50 years, as long as aspen trees live. And this is where they come to do it. This is where they come to what? Show that they are here, like the handprints painted on a canyon. If you go down this drainage, probably about 4 miles that direction, there's a boulder with a human handprint pecked into it. Is that what this place is a marking saying, we are here. This is us. This is the landscape of mountain lions, and this is where we come together. I mean, what does a mountain lion ceremony look like? Cats are such different animals than us. Is this what we're seeing here? Ceremony, gathering, the animals telling their story, because every animal has a story. And maybe not every animal gathers, but they all leave a mark, even if it is just a little nick in the aspen tree. I want to tell you a story about coming on one of these gatherings. Not a mountain lion gathering, different animal. I was in the sandstone desert of southeast Utah on an extended backpack with a group of friends, and I'd split off at dawn and was walking through a basin, this cliff-walled basin with canyons cut back through it into the rock, and I saw ravens flying toward this one little canyon in the back of the basin, and it was multiple ravens. First it was one, and then it was a couple more, and then pretty soon I maybe counted 10 or 15 ravens flying into this one narrow space. And I'd always wondered where the ravens are going, because sometimes you see them out on the horizon all flying to the same point, and they're notoriously intelligent birds. So what are they doing together? And this was a rare chance to actually witness it, to go see what the raven were do. So I followed them into this canyon, and I thought that I was being Mr. Ninja, stealthy, moving quietly through the bottom of this canyon, which was catastrophic with fallen boulders, and I thought, I'm going to come around the corner and they're not going to know that I'm here. They're all going to look up, and what is going to happen next? They're gathered around the frozen carcass of a fallen bighorn sheep, or what are they doing back here? When I came around the corner, ready to peek out, hoping to see them in action, I found maybe 30 ravens all staring at me. They were on ledges and on rock points. They were all over the canyon, and they were all still stationary in their robes like judges, heads turned, looking at me, which was chilling to be seen by so many ravens all at once. Do you really want that many birds looking at you? That many dark, wild birds, big beaks, big wings. Ravens are not small birds. Well, I decided to keep walking into them to see what was up. Why were they here? Why weren't they flying away? What are they doing back here? The closer I got, the more agitated they became. They began to call and then jump off of their rocks and fly across the other side of the canyon, only about 20 feet away, and then fly back and forth. So they were lacing the canyon and calling, getting louder and louder, more of them in the air as I came under them, and they're screeching then, all these ravens flying all around me. Then I saw these little pucks of rocks landing, pebbles that they were picking up, and twigs they were dropping over me. I didn't know what was going on. There was so much loudness. They mob other birds, raptors, owls, eagles, hawks, and just drive them crazy to get them out of a territory. And the same thing was happening here. They were mobbing me. They were surrounding me. And I fell back over onto my hand looking up, and I said, I don't know what you're saying. And the sound of my voice just incensed them, drove them to go faster and louder. And of course, I knew exactly what they were saying. They were saying, get out of here. This is not your place. So I left, walked back out of the canyon, and they all calmed down. They went back to their places and quieted, returned to their ledges and perches, all with their heads turned facing me. And so I walked out of there, and I went and found my friends. And for us, ravens are the gods of this landscape. They are the ones we see day in and day out. The other animals that you feel like you're communicating with, that they fly in low and they talk to you. They look at you. they interact with you, and we'd all wondered where they go when they disappear into off onto the horizon. And I said, I found the place. I don't know what's going on there, but we have to go. And so 4 of us walked back to that canyon and walked in through all the boulders fallen all around each other. And when we entered, the same thing happened. The ravens were all facing us, staring, and we walked into the dark enclosure of this space. And as we came closer to them, they did the same thing. They hopped off of their perches. They flew over our heads. They started mobbing us and screaming and screeching. And we're trying to figure out what's going on here. Why are they all in this one space? And that's when we started to find owl feathers that had been stuck under rocks or stuck up in a crack in the canyon wall. And we found more and more of them, and it was all one species. It was all the same owl. And if you lifted up one of the feathers, all the ravens would come to you, and they'd be swirling around you with the feather until you put it down. And some of the quills had been pecked so fiercely they had been pulped. And they were put under rocks so they wouldn't blow away, maybe, or we were looking up the side of the canyon, and 30, 40, 50 feet up, our owl feathers sticking out of the rock. And what we figured is the owls had driven, or the ravens had driven an owl back here and had mobbed it and had killed it in this place. And that this must be where they return to commemorate that moment. This must be where they gather to remember who they are. There are cultures of ravens. There are dialects of ravens. The animal speaks in a different way in a different region. The language can almost be broken down into words. What are they doing out here? This is their world. This is their ceremony. Owl feathers all around the canyon. And we backed out of that place. And the ravens returned to their perches and returned to whatever it is they are doing out here in their world.
So I think about these places where animals come together, and it's so easy to think that the world is ours, that it belongs to humans. We enter our own minds, and we forget. I forget. I think it is about my bills, my deadlines, the things that I have to do every day. And then an animal sweeps across in front of me. Often it's birds. I remember a dear friend of mine back when he and I were guiding in Baja, guiding sea kayak trips. We were having encounters with birds, ravens, kestrels, and he said, every time you see a bird, it's a message. And that's stuck with me ever since, that maybe they aren't coming to talk with me, but they're coming, their presence signals something. Maybe it signals just enough to look up, to look around you, to realize that you are not the only species. You are not the only thing out here. Just recently, I was backpacking with my boys. We were doing a trek in the coastal redwoods of California last week, and and we were finding banana slugs, and you, you encounter these bright yellow creatures without spinal cords, and you watch them. One morning I watched one for half an hour, and I put down my pen next to it to photograph it for scale, and it turned around and it got onto my pen, and it covered the length of the pen and wrapped around the clicker, and then turned around and came back the other way. And you just see the way its eye stalks are sticking out. If anything disturbs them, they pop back so quickly and then tentatively come out. You know that animal feels. Maybe that animal feels more than we do. It is so sensitive to the world, crawling over leaves, not crawling, but flowing and seeing the world. You know, how do animals encounter this world? Each species so different, where I'm sure that ravens look at raccoons and go, ah, raccoons. And raccoons look up at ravens and go, yeah, ravens. We all see each other as different kinds of animals, which we are, but we flow together. I'm thinking of a time that I encountered starlings. Some people call them sky carp. They are non-natives to North America, European starlings. And I encountered them once from a curious spot. I was in Seattle, and this was decades ago. When I worked with a publisher there. It was one of my first books. It was Secret Knowledge of Water, and I was with a publisher called Sasquatch Books, and they were on, I think, the 12th or 14th story of a building downtown, and they had access to the roof. And I like to go right in odd places, so I would climb up the ladder from their office onto the roof and right up there and look over at the alley below and see what was going on. And often it wasn't human activity that was the most fascinating. It was animal activity. It was seeing crows who were futzing over a plastic bag, grocery bag, blowing down the street, and watching their interactions as they were moving around this thing. And I saw starlings while I was up there. I saw starlings flying through the city. This was in downtown, so there were a lot of tall buildings around, and they were flying between buildings, but they were in large groups, which is called a murmuration. When it's not just a flock, it's a different kind of equation. When birds are flying in mass and they seem to become a whole organism. And let me share this with you. This is a murmuration of starlings, and this is this is a very large group, and I was probably seeing 100 or 200, maybe 300 starlings at a time flowing through the building. So imagine this swirling through downtown, this amoeba-like complex going between the buildings. And usually I'm looking for wild animals in the wild, but they are everywhere. They are deep in the cities, and these murmurations researchers have been studying them for some time. Complex movements, and the early 1900s, ornithologists were playing around with the notion that these were actually telekinetic instances where they were reading each other's minds, and the massive birds was able to think collectively, which may be true scientifically. I mean, not necessarily reading each other's minds, but reading each other's movements. Scientifically, this is considered the rapid transmission of local behavioral response to neighbors. So a large group behavior performed synchronistically. And this can happen in a couple of ways in a society. One is top down, where you have a leadership directing the mass. But this is different. This is self-organizing, small individual behaviors scaling up to the larger group, which is how most living things, most of the universe works. It flows, and this is how it flows. Uh, who is keeping track of whom out here? It turns out that the number is 7 birds. One bird interacts with 7 others around it, keeping track of how the birds are moving, forming a cell. And each of those 7 birds connects to another 7, and so on, until you have this self-thinking mass. And this is what I was seeing flying through Seattle. And I was seeing it on different streets, and they all were kind of heading to the same location. So I decided to go find out where the starlings were going. I dropped down onto the street and I followed them for blocks as they were these submarine organic shapes flowed between buildings. I followed them to one particular block where they were all landing at once, and there were tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of starlings on this one downtown street, and it was mania. There were trees along the street, and if one starling flew into a tree, another one had to fly out. There was no more room. The branches were hanging down, and it was this cacophony of bird sounds, and all the cars were covered with bird droppings. And this was the mass. This is where they all came to. I don't know what was going on in this place. I had to get under the eave of a building because it was just overwhelming. People out on the street were running to get out from under them, and I thought, this is miraculous. Like, this must just happen once in a lifetime. They've come to this place. And I was under the awning of a restaurant, and a cook came outside to smoke a cigarette, and he looked rather calm about it. I said, "Oh my God, what's happening here?" And he was smoking a cigarette, and he said, "Yeah, every night about 5 o'clock, this is what happens. And this is the place. This is where they chose. Every night, all the starlings of Seattle, or most of them it appeared, would come to this one place. Why? What is going on in their worlds? We live in our lives, and like I said, we don't often look up. But when we do, we realize that there are other animals. Majority of life on Earth is doing its thing, is living life like we are. And maybe humans are like this murmuration. We think we have presidents and leaders and we govern ourselves, but really we are flying within view of the 7 who are around us, who are watching the 7 around them, who are forming this organic form that maybe we can't see. Maybe we're so deep in it, we're just hearing the shouting of everybody and the wing beats, and we're interacting and we're finding our place, but maybe we can't see how beautiful we are. This is the world I'm looking for. The world of animals moving all around us, living their lives. I want to tell you one more story. And this is, I'm going to read this. I'm going to try something here. I'm going to share a screen with you in a moment, but this is from my book, Animal Dialogues. And it's the chapter on coyote. Ragged and tired, we reached the Air Motor USA windmill after 2 weeks of crossing the Sonoran Desert. Water cranks out of the desert here like ice from the center of the sun. At the windmill was the first of our 2 food caches, hidden 112 degrees and a few hundred yards southeast of the well, under a Palo Verde tree. Our next cache was another week away. Backpacks were dropped as if we were shedding skin, a snake-like move that made sense now. We sat and waited for evening, then got about the small tasks of preparing a meal. Behind us, a single coyote barked a few times. The voice searched the area and found no other coyotes. We looked up. then returned to work. Again, the bark came closer. When it came a third time, we both stood and scanned the cross-hatched shadows of palo verdes and creosote bushes. My traveling companion, Irvin Fernandez, grabbed his binoculars and loped in one direction, hunched to the height of the creosote. I saw motion through the spaces, parts of a coyote on the move up a nearby wash. Irvin was fixed on it from another vantage, signaling that he could see it. The coyote obeys something internal that requires it to sing, even when solitary. The singing brings them together. It creates a detailed map of coyotes across a landscape. About a third of all coyotes will be in packs, another third traveling in pairs, and the remaining third going solo. The coyote barked again, and I was surprised there was no answer. I slipped my flute, long wooden and Japanese, from my pack and started playing to see what would happen. Irvin ducked, holding the binoculars to his eyes. I could not see the animal, thinking it had moved on. I stopped playing. Without losing sight of play, Irvin signaled with a hand to keep going, and so I played. And as I did, he gestured more, winding his hand in the air, saying, "Play, play." I played high and furious. I felt the clear sensation of my brain grasping for air. My embouchure muscles began to ache. Irvin climbed a windmill tower and fused with the fading western sky. Calm evening air felt the blades inert. I walked toward him, covering the sound of my footsteps with flute notes. I was lost in the music. My sight became hazy. Finally, I stopped and inhaled deeply, my vision dazzled with an oxygen-starved brain. "It sat down," he whispered to me. "It's just sitting there, listening." Slowly, I climbed the metal tower, and when I reached Irvin, I turned and held up my binoculars. The coyote was sitting in the open, truly in the open. The nearest plant was a tuberosa in full red bloom, 20 feet away. The coyote, perhaps accustomed to strange motions and noises from the windmill, ignored us. Its ears were perked, and after it turned its head in all directions, it ducked nose to tail and closed its eyes. When it did this, it turned to stone. Occasionally, I glanced up to a shift in the wind or the sound of a quail covey. My hands grew sore, gripped to the steel of the windmill. The stone turned back to a coyote. It rose from the ground and stood facing west. It barked. Its tone suggested that it was feeling the terrain with its voice. The coyote allowed enough time for each sound to drift away before introducing the next. Each bark prompted a tug on the tail that turned it under the coyote's belly, the tip of its tail black, because I have heard he was the coyote who stole fire and brought it to humans. He stole it by thrusting his own tail into the first fire, turning the end black. It was the coyote who brought us fire, light, and warmth. The barks continued into the world, not finding nothing. The coyote faced west, expecting an answer, and not yielding to silence. The barking was like foreplay, softening the air that was then taken up by a solitary howling. The coyote's head lifted to send the song upward, tail tucked far under. The song echoed. The coyote waited. There is a loneliness about a coyote not answered. The spaces are much more open, devoid of the social pleasures of the pack animals. At other times, there would be the feeling of the coyotes having eaten rabbits or mice, unfolding themselves on warm rocks in the day, several of them with lazy eyes, a family. Now we were all very far away, alone. Now the land was so huge. It went on as far as the coyote's voice will carry. and there was nothing to impede the sound. The only home the coyote had was that bushy tail, and if I had it, I would curl beneath it and remain very still. The coyote did not grow anxious. It did not scratch disappointment into the dirt. It howled again. One bark returned from the west. So far away, it could have been only a strand of hair slipping over my left ear. Coyote ears stood erect, registering the sound, telling me it was real. 2 barks, then howling. The entire desert in a few seconds was a cacophony of coyotes shouting back and forth. The desert changed instantly. It turned from stones to coyotes. Whining went high with shouts and yelps hurled from all directions. They were everywhere, although from the top of the windmill I could not see them at all. The first coyote wasted no time in trotting west into the sound. As soon as it was beyond the arroyo, we lost it. Irvin and I climbed down and walked wordlessly to camp. There we returned to our small tasks. Soon we ate hot pozole with rice. Isolated coyote packs released songs into the night sky. Their frenetic tones took the desert and pushed it even farther than the loneliness could take it, connecting far points with strings of sound. The 2 of us with our warm pots of food were no more than objects dangling in a web, witnesses to the lives of coyotes. That's chapter from my book, Animal Dialogues. And I hear coyotes. Probably most of us hear them. And we hear the way they're talking, the way they're calling across distances, the way this landscape is theirs, but not theirs alone. You look into it deeper and you find the bears, you find the eagles, you find the swallows and the fireflies. You find in the city the starlings flying all to a single point. This is their world and ours as well. We are animals. I think back to that quote from the Chilean biologist. Living systems are cognitive systems. They are thinking. We think of ourselves as individuals. And to a degree we are. But really, we're within a web of interactions. We're within a greater mind of wild animals that surround us, that are here all the time. Thank you for listening to these stories tonight. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Craig.
Hi, Rebecca.
We're going to entertain some questions and a lot of wonderful comments. You all in the chat can use the chat or the Q&A and share some questions.
It's nice to see the comments. Thank you, you guys. I see them popping up down below. I appreciate you being here to hear these stories. So I'm open for any questions. Rebecca, if you want to field anything to me.
Sure. I noticed in your bio that you said you've spent part of your life as a professional musician. I was curious if it was flute only or if you have other instruments you play.
No, flute came later. I was a trombone player, which doesn't go as well in the backcountry, but I used to play symphony and jazz in my 20s. So I did that professionally for a little while, but I was also a river guide at the same time. So I was an odd cookie, which hasn't really changed that much.
We do have a question from Bob Hartzell. What is the biggest lesson you have learned from animals, birds, etc.?
Oh, God. The biggest lesson. I guess what comes to mind immediately is the lesson that that they aren't other, that everything that we do can be found in the animal world, that our building of elaborate governmental systems and architecture is found in anthills and termite mounds, that we think that our traits are are just human and unique to us. But I guess every time I come up with something that says, okay, this is human and only human, some emotional capacity or linguistic capacity, I realize it's not. And so the biggest lesson is to realize that we are animal as well. I don't know if that's what you're asking in particular, but that's what comes to mind.
That's a wonderful answer. We had a speaker a number of years ago, Mark Beckhoff, who works with the Jane Goodall Institute. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah.
He did 2 lectures on the sentient nature of animals, and it was very moving and tied in very much with what you said. So we have a question about if someone's wondering if you are a vegetarian.
No, I'm not a vegetarian. I eat animals. It is also something that I struggle with. But I recognize that we are in a world of eating each other. But I think it's also, the industrial use of animals is something that I try to avoid. But there are times that I don't. There are times, just on this trip with my boys, where we were grabbing whatever meat we could find on the road. I think I'm an opportunist, but then there's part of me that is always kind of pulling back and going, well, if you really carry this out, what you believe about animals, you wouldn't be doing this. It's a thing that's on my mind. It fluctuates throughout my life.
Okay, and we got lots of questions now. They're popping up. Do you feel the spirituality of creatures in the loosest sense of the word?
The spirituality of creatures. Well, I think it's probably more, we're always going over boundaries, right? The boundary between you and another animal, which I think that is spirit. I think each animal, probably each individual, has a different place in the world, which maybe the spirit. I think about it spiritually. But animals might not break it down to distinct categories of this is spirit, this is mind. Maybe that is more of a human thing, but I'm sure that ravens do that too. Ravens probably sense the spirituality of humans, of each individual. But I do feel like it's a very, that world of crossing over into other animals is a spiritual realm. It is your spirit meeting another spirit, another being. But I also think it's true when you meet other people. I think of animals as people, I guess, which goes back to that question, the vegetarian question, like, oh, I eat people.
So then someone asked, can you please tell us a bit about your next book?
Well, I don't know what the next book is exactly. It's kind of an organic process, and I am thinking a lot about animals these days. I've been right here where I live, which is give you a vista here. I live in Southwest Colorado, and there's a canyon right below the house here that is a migratory corridor. Mountain lions are moving through here all the time. And I've been trying to find my way into their world, setting up blinds. And I think that there is a book that is rising out of that, because I'm not trying to speak for animals. I'm trying to be a voice that they can I can say, here's what they're doing, here's where they live. So this book is about, if this book actually comes together, is about being in their landscape and seeing them moving through it, and figuring out how I can relate to them, how, I go from invading their place to being still in their place, to the reciprocity of like that fox coming to us at the fireflies. Like, I want to get to that point where the animals are coming to me and we are having a conversation. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now, but I'm also assembling urban stories. I've got some great encounters in New York City with animals. So I'm thinking about animals these days, obviously.
That's awesome. We'll look forward to the next book. Here's a question. Craig, I know you've spent time in many dry places, but even there, wildlife depend on the rare locations of water.
Mhm.
Uh, Over your years of exploration and travel, do you see evidence of drying, of climate change, and any changes in animal behavior that you might attribute to that?
Oh yeah, yeah. I see that everywhere. Interestingly, I was just in Yosemite a couple days ago uh, with with some rangers there who are doing interpretive work and doing biological work and looking at how lodgepole pines are moving into the meadows and really debating on what to do about this because it's changing the landscape and that's something that I see out here. I mean, between fires and 2 years ago, the creek that runs below the house here dried up, and I talked to the people who lived here for 25 years before us, and they'd never seen that. Uh, and there are beaver dams down there. I don't know what happened to the beaver, but this is the second summer where the creek's running and the beaver haven't returned. So I'm definitely seeing changes that both I haven't seen, and I can go back in time and talk to people or research and see how the changes that I'm seeing around here are significant. That they do historically stand out. So yes, there's no doubt that climate is changing and animals are of course changing with it, moving their ranges to the north, new animals showing up that haven't been seen before. It's happening all over the place.
Good. And someone asked, have you ever had a frightening animal encounter?
Many. I mean, right, my mind immediately flashes to times too close to grizzly bears in the Arctic. Um, at least one or two mountain lion encounters that were within 5 or 6 feet of each other that might not have been frightening for the mountain lion, but were frightening for me. But what also comes to mind is like uh, a praying mantis crawling up my arm. An animal that is beautiful and fascinating. I love praying mantises, but if you ever had one just show up out of nowhere and you're looking right into its face and it's got its claws raised up and you just think this thing can take me down. um, yeah, I've had plenty of frightening encounters and I think about that as I travel out here, as I get close to mountain lions. I mean, I think about I travel unarmed, and I did. I've spent hundreds of days in the Alaskan backcountry unarmed, mostly because I didn't want to shoot my partner or my foot or shoot the paw of an angry bear. But the question comes up: should I have a firearm out here? And how would I feel about inserting myself into an animal landscape and then killing an aggressive animal because I happen to be there? Those things are on my mind.
Yeah, good. And kind of a segue from that, do you feel we've become estranged from nature now to the extent that it's now a lost cause trying to get back?
I feel like we have become estranged and are becoming more estranged to the nature that is around us and getting more focused on the human nature. But I don't think it's a lost cause. I think it's far from a lost cause because I think it's always in us. I think you have the capability of smelling so much more, of picking up so many more scents if you paid attention to it. I think that I don't see the lost cause aspect of it. I can see that we're getting so far away that it sometimes feels terrifying. Um, but like children know immediately what the natural world is about. They know how to move into it. They respond directly to it. I think it is genetic, it's innate. We've been evolving for too many millions of years to not maintain that connection somehow genetically, physically. I think any of us thrown back into it would understand on some level. So I think it's far from a lost cause, but I do think we are detaching more and more.
Okay, and a perfect follow-up to that. Any insight, stories, activities to help young elementary students appreciate the perspective of humans as part of the natural world without making these small people feel even smaller, and instead helping them feel connected and bigger in that sense?
Ah, that's a good question. Um, I mean, my immediate thought is get them out there and just wherever it is. If it's a vacant lot, go find crickets. Listen for cricket song and say, hey, can you find the crickets that's making that song, and without disturbing it, like without making it stop singing. Can you get up to it that slowly? Or out here, get them out into the trees, out into a park, out into anything. And I think the interesting part about that question is how to do it without making them feel smaller. I think you lose sense of scale out there, and maybe it's reminding them that you're not small. It's just that the scale is all over the place, that some things are bigger than you and some things are smaller. Focus on the cricket, focus on the worm, and then focus on the hawk flying overhead in New York City. Focus on the coyote. Look at all the scales, but just get out there. um, Drop kids in a creek and take their shoes off and have them move around in it. I think that is the most important thing. I mean, that for me is what saves me is getting out there and touching it, being in it. So I would suggest the same.
What nature authors most influenced you, and will your boys be writers?
My boys were writers. I can see my 13-year-old is shaking his head furiously. No, nope. My Which is fine. I think writing is a weird habit. Um, uh, let's see. And my 17-year-old, he writes, but nothing like what I do. He writes um, crazy fantasy fiction, wild. I couldn't even get into it, but they both do their own thing. Anne Zwinger was somebody who I picked up early. I picked her books up in high school, I think, and she kind of started me on this path. Mary Oliver is a poet who I feel very connected with in my writing. Also, Barry Lopez is somebody who was very influential for me early on. So Anne Zwinger, Mary Oliver, Barry Lopez. So more contemporary authors that I've followed through since my 20s. And Gretel Ehrlich is somebody who influenced me quite a bit. So those are 4 authors I've been with, and I don't know if I would hope my children would be writers. I think there are many ways of experiencing and interacting with the world, and writing is not the only one. And it's a beautiful, amazing life, but it is also complicated. You're constantly mining stories from the world, from yourself, and sometimes it feels like an extractive industry that you're trying to tone into a beautiful industry. So it's writing is a complicated process.
Amen. During your walks for House of Rain, did you have experiences that tied you to the ancient peoples? And did animals factor in?
Mm. Huh. It was a while ago. um, I mean, yeah, the experience is tied. That was where I for House of Rain, I walked about 1,000 miles around the Four Corners and down through Utah and Arizona to northern Mexico, following pre-Columbian migrations, Pueblo culture, and of course, I mean, you can't walk 100 feet out here without finding some tie to ancestry, some human tie, some flake on the ground, or potsherd, or then as you get farther out, cliff dwellings. So I felt constantly tied to the ancestry in this landscape, and of course there are animals moving in and out all the time. I found a cliff dwelling in east central Arizona uh, that it looked like a mountain lion had denned there and had given birth inside the cliff dwelling. You could see the sheen on the ground where the placenta had fallen, and so yeah, the animal world is always moving in and out of the human world, especially in these ancient places. You know, following mountain lions through cliff dwelling sites down to a spring where they'd go to drink. The ancestry here in the animal realm it's inseparable.
Wow. And do you still sleep in caves, sharing them with black widow spiders?
I do. I do. I get bit by things in caves. Yeah, I'm still doing that. I mean, not as much as I think in my 30s and early 40s. I think having kids, making a living, that's it's caused it to be much more focused. I used to be out where I was just out all the time. Most of the year I was on the ground, but now I live in a building with a roof. But a lot of the summer, my 13-year-old and I had a tent set up outside with just a bug screen. And yeah, we sleep in caves. When the weather sends you in, you find a hole and you get in it.
From Tucson, we recently encountered two Gila, or however you say it, Gila monsters in our yard. Probably a mating pair, big, beautiful lizards going about their business. Briefly, what do you think of Gila monsters?
I love Gila monsters. They look like they're beaded and colorful. That kind of rusty red, orange, and deep black. And if you live in Tucson, you know that you don't want to grab one because they are poisonous and they lock their jaws onto you, so you can't pry them off. My encounters have actually been pretty rare. Having two come in, that's meaningful. I think that somebody asked earlier about the spirituality of animals. I think there is each animal has a different relationship with the world and something different to convey. And I don't know what Gila monsters mean or what they bring, but every time I've seen one, it's been an extraordinary moment. So having two come into your world, I just consider yourself blessed, and and watch them as closely as possible. Well, you decide how close you want to get.
Here's a comment, and then a little bit different topic. Someone says, this conversation causes my mind to flash from interaction with wildlife moments. I think I remember those more than with people, from interactions and observations with wildlife.
Yeah.
Just a comment. And then a little bit different tack. A few people had questions about your writing. One was if Ed Abbey was an influence.
Yeah, I think so. I Monkey Wrench Gang was the book of his that I really connected with. I love Desert Solitaire. I know in this era of looking back at people decades ago, we're applying them to current politics, and Edward Abbey is getting hammered, which I think he would love. But I I read a lot of his stuff, but I also found when I was reading Desert Solitaire, I went, well, this is cool, but I'd rather be out there doing it. So he more reminded me of where I want to be. I don't so much read the people who write in my zone, my geography, because I want to be in it rather than reading about it. It makes me antsy. But Edward Abbey is definitely an influence.
And a comment, please keep writing, Craig. Not such a weird habit when you're gifted.
I will definitely keep writing.
And then a question about your process. Can you tell us a little bit about your writing process? Do your sketches play into getting ideas on paper? Anything that helps in addition to spending a lot of time observing nature?
Well, let me grab my journal here. Hold on a second. So this is the thing that I carry around with me, and I have locations written around the outside of it, and so this is what I'm doing out in the field. Is I'm writing down concepts. I'm writing down from New York. This is a meeting with Jen, my agent, 21st floor, 250 West 57th. She's begging me to talk to her before planning and executing another significant trip. She assures me that if she gives me time, if I give her time, she could sell it. So there's like a random just observation from the day, or from just Tuolumne Meadows in Yosemite to Redwoods. Let's see, here's the banana slug, yellowish, milky bodied, long blade of a tail. When its twin eye stalks stretch forward to their fullest extent, it appears unbridled, like a horse galloping into an open field, 1.5 inches per minute. So I'm using this to just write down things as they come, whatever small observation of the day I pick up, and then I do a lot of my writing by hand, and I'm processing that into a story. I'm thumbing through this, looking for details, but I'll write outlines, but it really forms organically. I throw away more outlines than I use. They're all just used to keep me going. But really it all comes from out there where things are happening.
Great answer. Whose painting is behind you?
Oh, that's Susie Billings. She owned this house before we did, and she built this place with her husband Duncan, and she's a beautiful artist, and we are still very, very close, and we lived here together for a time. So I'm trying to fit into the shoes of an artist by living here.
Great. What about John Muir? Someone asked.
John Muir. We have the same birthday.
Yeah.
I don't know how much he influenced me, other than I think influencing the writers who influenced me. I think he's part of the lineage, but he's more the genetic part of a lineage of nature writing, and going out and experiencing the walk and write. I think he laid kind of a foundation that I'm going off of. But I can't say that I went to him as a source. But it's not over yet. I find some of the old writers that I go back to, like John Muir, that I start reading, going, oh, this has a lot to do with the way I write without me even knowing it.
Okay. How many states have you got left to explore?
Oh, God, I don't know. Most.
Most.
I think a couple books ago, I wrote a book on the Ice Age in North America, and that sent me out to a lot of places I hadn't been before, Florida and New Jersey. And I did some amazing stuff in like the New Jersey Pine Barrens, walked across New Jersey for 5 days, and I think didn't see a single person on the trail. But a lot of the South I haven't been to. A lot of the Midwest. My life has mostly been in the West. It's mostly been from the Arctic to South America, kind of along the spine of the Rockies. I am more of a homebody than anything. I like to really burrow into my place and be here. So there's still a lot. I have not been to Arkansas and haven't been to Georgia. Pretty sure I haven't been to Ohio. But when I go there, that's the problem. I went to Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin, Lake Superior, and I was just blown away, and then just kept going back and back. I got to be careful because I fall in love with places, and it gets difficult when you fall in love with too much.
What would you most recommend that people do, contribute to, encourage in order to sustain wildlands and wildlife, which are at risk from many threats?
That is a really good question. I think of a lot of local action. I think of connectivity. The wildlands. It's not coming to mind right now. Wildlands project that Michael Soule recently passed, a conservation biologist, was trying to working on connecting migratory corridors. But I think that it's all the small places. Like I think the Greater Arkansas River Association is a place. Places like that are taking care of one watershed. They need help. I think I also feel strongly about the Nature Conservancy. Grabbing pieces of land and saying, okay, we're going to hold on to these. So anything that connects places, that maintains ecosystems in a place, wherever it is locally, or reach out to Greater Arkansas River Association, and those are places to start.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions, and I think we should wrap it up soon. Given your passion for nature, do you engage in political activism? Which kind of ties to the last question.
Yeah, I think that it's impossible not to engage with political activism. I think no matter what you do, you're engaging with it. I'm maybe not standing on a soapbox as a political activist so much as telling a story that I'm wanting to go, okay, in 100 years, I want to keep this thread moving through time, through history. I want to push this. I do. I'm on an advisory board for a group for Great Old Broads for Wilderness in the Southwest. So there are places where I'm ducking in and pitching where I can. But a lot of my work, I feel, is storytelling, is more the heartbeat of keep this idea moving. I get involved in political activism, and I get the nice death threats or whatever. But I'm also focused on this deeper story of remember the natural world wherever it applies, remember it in legislation, or remember it personally. So I come at it from a lot of different angles. It's a hard question to answer.
And This is not a small question, so but maybe a brief answer. Are you in favor of reintroducing wolves here in Colorado?
Am I in favor of reintroducing wolves? I'm in favor of wolves being reintroduced. Wolves finding their way into places, because I think we extirpated a lot of species that will flow back in. So I guess what I'm in favor of is maintaining the corridors, keeping them open, because they will come back in. Animals are in motion right now everywhere, and am I in favor of helicoptering them into a spot and dropping them? Not so much that. I'm in favor of keeping the channels open so they can move in, because I think that they belong here, and the ecosystem would support them. And yes, I'm in favor. About that answer.
Good answer to a complicated question. What is your favorite place in New Mexico?
My favorite place in New Mexico. Well, my family's from Roswell, and I avoid it. But
Family's there, or because you don't like Roswell?
I can't say. Favorite place in New Mexico? That's a big state. I mean, I tend toward northern, just because that's probably closer to me, and I tend toward the Four Corners part of northern, the Chusca Range, the big dry basin of Chaco. I think Chaco Canyon and the area around it is probably the place that I have spent the most time, have focused most of my energy there. But also, I grew up fishing with my father and my grandfather on the Chama, and I love that high elevation part of New Mexico. It's the cottonwoods in October along the Rio Grande. I'd say that the stained glass golden cottonwoods, that would be my favorite.
Beautiful image. And a final comment, an invitation. We recommend a visit to the wild and scenic rivers of the Ozarks in Missouri and Arkansas. The Blue Springs are the perfect counterpart for your desert landscapes.
I would love that. It'll happen. It will happen.
So that